So it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this seminar by Gerard Berry. So I think for many of us, we don't need any introduction to Gerard. He's been a regular visitor to India for many years now. I first met him in India, I would guess, more than 30 years ago. And he has certainly seen much more of India than I have. He has a deep connect with Indian music and culture and so on. So right now, I mean, he has spent many years in Ecole des Mines and in India. We had some joint collaborations where we used to meet. And he has been at the Collège de France. And right now, he is the itinerant chair of Collège de France, which means that his duty is to visit places and give talks representing Collège de France. Unfortunately, this visit has become virtual because of the COVID situation. So he was not able to come in March as he had planned, nor in October as he had revised his plan. But we are very happy that in this situation, we are able to have him online. So as a brief introduction for people who don't know Gerard Berry's work, I think the most famous thing that people know him for is his work on Esterel. But he has a very wide range of interests, and he is kind of, if you look at some of his lectures online, you'll see that he has given courses on everything from lambda calculus to computer music. And I saw a very interesting signature on his mail yesterday where he said that he is professor full of merit. And I was very puzzled by what he meant by professor full of merit, which is his counterpoint to the fact that he is professor emeritus, which means professor out of merit, apparently, if you translate from Latin. So he would like to contest that and see he is now professor full of merit. So with that, I would like to hand over to Gerard, and over to you.
Thank you, Daman, and very happy to be here, if I can say so, at least virtually. So I will share my screen
Yeah, so
with
sorry,
you.
Gerard, before you start, let me just ask everybody who's not speaking to please mute their thing so that there's no disturbance because we don't want any background noise. Thank you.
Okay, so you see my screen, I guess?
Yes, it's on.
Okay, so informatics and mathematics, ever more fruitful interactions. Interactions are very old in between informatics and mathematics, as we shall see. And so I thank Madhavan a lot to have organized this talk, and I'm too sad not to be there, but I will try to do my best to teleport. So, sorry, I have to take my pointer. Allez. Allez. Oh, sorry, I have 1 second because
Sure.
I need to put my. You see a bar on the top of the screen or not?
Yes.
You see it, so I have to remove it. Okay, I removed it. Okay, so we have a pretty busy agenda, but it will start by how informatics differs from and collaborates with mathematics, and not only mathematics, with physics. So the first thing here, yes, the first thing is that about a triangle that drove science and technology for a long time, the triangle between matter, energy, and waves. So matter, energy came first because they are very intuitive, where waves came later with Fourier. And now they are part of mathematics and physics. And most mathematics until the beginning of the 20th century was developed to deal with this triangle. Starting with Galileo, Newton, and so on. Lots of mathematics have been given to that. Now, there is a big change. The newcomer in the middle, which is information and algorithms. Well, these are newcomers in science, not in civilization, of course, because I will see that algorithm predated mathematics and information has always been there, but not quite as an object of study and not quite as an object of systematic use. So many people thought for long, including in mathematics, many people thought that informatics, I use informatics and not computer science because informatics is not just about computer science is not just about computers, as we can see. Many people claim it was just a tool. And I think this is very, very much misleading because it's not just a tool, it's much more than that. And information is completely different from matter, energy, and waves in all the way you can think. And it gives a new and radically different new way of thinking and acting on lots of subjects. And it has extremely efficient levers in both science and society. People keep talking about the levers in society, but it's also true in science, as I can show. It starts being a little true, not yet that much in mathematics as well. So where this power come from? It comes from the universality of information and algorithms. There is only one kind of information. Whatever you do, everything is the same information. Photographs, biology, neurology, mathematics, history, whatever. There is only one kind of information. There is, although there are thousands of algorithms, there is a unique notion of algorithm. There are no algorithms specific to mathematics or to kind of technology. And there is a universal machine, thanks to Turing. There are no universal machines in any other field. There are no universal engine, no universal light engine, and so on. Good. So the information lever is hyper efficient, but that's another talk. And everything becomes information. This is why we can do Zoom. And processing information is much more valuable than processing matters. This is what India is evolving to computing. Booking.com is the king of hotels, but has no hotels, has only information. But the problem, and that happened in math too, is reasoning on and acting with informatics is very different from reasoning with matter and energy and waves. And that will show up in everything I will say. So now you all know in India that understanding the essence of informatics has become essential. And in France, it's known since the last 2 years. It's only 2 years ago that we could introduce informatics at high school. And I worked on that for 30 years, by the way. Cool. So who are the precursors? Al-Khwarizmi is very interesting because very few people in the world knew his name, although he invented many things. Like algorithm, the word algorithm comes from his name, although they predated him. We call Arabic numerals 0 to 9 in France. And of course, they are Indian numerals brought by Al-Khwarizmi to the Western world. Algebra is a word in the middle of a title of an important treaty on solving equation. And by the way, Al-Khwarizmi also invented a way to find the roots of second-degree polynomials, which almost nobody knows. So it's an important guy. Turing, everybody knows Turing now. Computability, universality, and theoretical universal machine. Major man. And he invented also many other things, like proving programs. He had a 1947 paper saying that we should not test program, but prove it, which I use a lot in my lectures. And Claude Shannon, who made the theory of communication, which was later extended in theory of information. So these are the three really real founders of the domain. So informatics is based on 4 pillars plus us. Pillars are data, algorithms, programs, and machine. The difference between algorithm and program is clear. Machines are stupid and entirely stupid, not like mathematicians. So algorithms are good for mathematicians, but very far from machines. And programs are needed to teach these totally stupid machines that know nothing but adding 2 numbers and placing a thing from one place to another, to teach to do the algorithm in all details. So this is why programming and algorithms are vastly different. But here I will talk mostly of algorithms. Now, many more objects than human beings now concerned, but here we will deal with, not with these aspects. A point which is in common with the mathematics is that it is a construction science, because in informatics, we build everything. It doesn't exist like that in nature. There are no computers, although biology does a lot of computing. And we build everything, which is true also in mathematics. Mathematics sometimes discovers property of nature, sometimes builds concepts. It's very similar. And it shows up in informatics very much because the machines are so complicated that we need algorithms and programs to build them. In your cell phone, the circuit has about 12 billion transistors. So there is no way to build them by hand. So there is a lot of mathematics and a lot of informatics in them. Who started first? Well, clearly algorithms. Very old, probably predating writing. And I don't know exactly the dates in India, but India was, of course, very strong there because the text of Brahmagupta, for example, very early about positive and negative numbers and how to deal with them. I know them. And but the real revolution was the Greeks with the notion of proof. The proof is the difference between guessing that something is true and proving that something is true. So I will talk about that later. Then the axiomatization of mathematics, which has been very fundamental for computing. And then computability and incompleteness with Gödel. Gödel formalized the notion of proof in a notion that is in a way that is now fundamental. Turing, Church, big difference. Turing and Church, who did the same thing who obtained the same result about the same time. Turing is about computation, abstract, and machines, and Church is about languages. Okay, and there is an equivalence between the two, which is not trivial. Logics, then, the logics of programming, because since the machine is very, very stupid, you have to tell everything in every detail, and every detail must be perfectly right, which is not true for mathematicians between them when they talk to each other. So logic to proof programs, starting with actually Turing, 1947, and culminating now with Wet-Coquan, we shall see. Then there was also a little later invention of algorithmic complexity. I'll talk about that too. And program semantics that allows I'll talk for that too in the end, which are three big branches of computation. There is another branch, which is data, and lots of open problem in mathematics about data. So in the 21st century, it was a period of huge expansion of the link between, actually, it should be 20th century, sorry, bug in the slide, I will correct it. Applied maths, which is everywhere now. Image and signal processing that came in the 70s, but now dominates medicine, for example. Symbolic computation, which is very, very old, and Alain Cohn, who is a Fields Medal at the very famous mathematician at Collège de France, say, I cannot live without Mathematica, because he works on the non-commutative geometry of quantum mechanics, and the computations are doable by machines, but not by hand. Simulation, I will talk about that. And then getting more into informatics, programming and program semantics, algorithmics, computational geometry, which is now fundamental for anything kind of modeling. Huge graph and graph theory, which is fundamental for internet. Data science, machine learning, and deep learning, which I put in red, because nobody knows whether it really works. Nobody knows how it can be made more reliable and so on. And these are huge mathematical problems. And we have a chair by Stéphane Malat, who used to be the king of wavelets in the Collège de France. So that's not my domain. Logic, I will show examples with SATs, Boolean satisfaction, and machine-based formal reasoning and proving, and I will show application of that. Good. But first, in the conventional applications, the main thing is that physics and mathematics are close, and informatics are closer to each other now. For example, an MRI scanner, which you see here, an MRI scanner, people think it's a machine that gives an image. It's absolutely not true. It gives tons of somewhat rotten data, that has to be worked out very cleverly by very subtle algorithms to give 4D images or 3D images that we do now. DNA sequencer, which are, sorry, the DNA sequencers here, these are also full of algorithms because when you sequence a DNA, you find small pieces of small sequences of letters in one order or the other. Actually, you don't quite know in which order they are sequenced, and you have to build a huge word, maybe billions of letters out of that, and this is not a trivial problem. Robots, of course, control theory and communication theory and whatever, and now the astronomers work only on computers. They don't look at the sky anymore, or just for fun, but they all work on a huge databases of immense data. For example, the next generation of radio wave telescope is supposed to generate per day the volume that circulates on the web per year. Good. Digital simulation and modeling is also well known for rockets, for stars, and this is quite important because you don't make a star explode in the lab. You have no choice. For protein folding in biology and many other things, and for surgery preparation. Good example here, you have a heart with a problem. It's a child heart called a tetralogy Fallot. And the relation between surgeons and computer scientists is that they cut and paste. But the problem is that the surgeons have, how do they guess to get to the new heart here, you have to cut and paste this extra part here, and it's not trivial to know where. And simulation now provides you good tools to do that. So informatics is everywhere in all sciences, even social sciences. Think of simulation, which is a major use of mathematics. What is simulation doing? Well, it replaces matter, energy, and waves by only information. In a simulator, you deal with only information. We have to complement or replace the mathematical law of nature by algorithmic laws, and sometimes by laws which were not put by mathematicians other than algorithmics, like the simulation of sand dunes by how do you call that? Cellular automata, which were invented by von Neumann, and who are in the frontier of mathematics and informatics. More interesting, you play with time because you can replace time by physical time of the process by computation time. For example, you can simulate fast, slow phenomena like galaxy collisions. You have a fabulous professor on that, Françoise Combe at Collège de France. You better don't do it in real time. Huh? Slow simulation of fast phenomena like protein folding, which is in microseconds or milliseconds, or real-time simulation for, say, airplane pilots or whatever. So that's important because when you have information, you become largely independent from matter. Not totally. You need matter, energy, and waves to build the computers. But the problem, the real thing, which not everybody realizes, is that the matter, energy, and waves you need in your computers are completely different from the one you simulate in your process. You use the same for biology or stars. That's absolutely central. And this is completely novel in history, but shared by mathematics. The mathematics is the same for biology or stars. Huh? The same, I mean, up to details. Of course, simulation has a limit, which American oil-oriented people say you won't find oil by drilling the map. That everybody should know. Okay, now let's go to more modern stuff. Randomized algorithm. So this is a relatively recent field, which was introduced long ago by Rabin, but it has exploded recently. So the idea is very simple. When you need, with very big problem, well-directed randomization, which is flipping coins, no more, no less, because the bit is a unit information, the coin is a unit for random information. It's an excellent way of exploring complex spaces. And the big benefit, and you can easily parallelize randomized algorithm. They started long ago for Ethernet, for example, which is a really randomized algorithm, but Ethernet is not working. The algorithm is not correct for Ethernet. It's good enough, but Kapetanakis is much better. It's really flip coins. It's much better. I can comment on it does convert. Ethernet may, if Ethernet doesn't forbid a finite number of messages is exchanged by a finite number of people to last infinitely long, which means not to be exchanged. Kapetanakis does. Internet routing, which is just full of run or 4G cellular communication, they are just full of huge calculations on and very smart calculations on huge randomized matrices, random matrices. Computational geometry, all modern algorithms are random because it's too expensive otherwise. Search engines, I will show a little bit. Biology, Monte Carlo simulation in many things, that's old. Let's look at the web. So a small company called Google was born out of a single algorithm invented by two PhDs at Stanford who then never finished their PhD. They made a little company, a startup instead. And it's to compute the web page popularity. Why was there a need for that? Because AltaVista, who was built by a friend of me and an American guy, Blaise Fanning for the American and Louis Monnier for the French guy, was scanning all the web. All the web was about 16 million pages. Now all the web is about several dozen billion pages. So you cannot use the same technique and you can say, here are the 5 million more interesting answers for you without sorting them out. So the first algorithm invented by Page and Brin was the popularity. So how do we find the popularity of a web page? You can naively say that a web page is popular by if you have many pages pointing to it. But that's a fake because this may be just fake pages just made to make popular. So you want to do much better. You want like to say that a page is popular if it is pointed to by many popular pages. So you have a huge recursive definition for a thing of style of billions, and you have to make this calculation, which is quite simple. Explain it just a little later. No details, no need. It's published and easy to read. And you cannot compute the inverse of a billion size matrix. So what is the algorithm? It's very simple. You take little wanderers and you drop them and they go randomly somewhere. For example, they start here. And here they put a little stone on the ground, that is the increment counter. And then they look at the outgoing arrow and they get out. They get out according to they take it's a little more complicated by that, but it's exactly that. They choose an arrow to go out randomly. Well, there are weights, but the weights are basically the current popularity of the output of the arrow. And they put a stone here and a stone here, and from time to time they die, and some other observer will come. So maybe they die after eight little travels like that. And then it's very easy to parallelize, and you can check that it gives a very good approximation of the solution. So this algorithm this single algorithm built the second company in the world by now. Okay, another example, men versus women in computer science. There are zillions of examples, but I like this one by Claire Mathieu, who was professor at Collège de France for 1 year. She's a great algorithmic person. Define the professor of fame as the number of PhD students the professor got. And you can measure that there are more famous men, there are more famous women in computer science. Not hard to measure. Okay, is it because men want to get women out, or is it because women are shy? Is it because So you can see all sorts of sociological hypotheses, but maybe there is worse than that. There are probabilities. You make three hypotheses. One, the field has more men than women, strictly more, huh? Strictly bigger than half. PhD students prefer preparing with famous professors. Hard to contest. Men professors tend to prefer accepting male PhD students. That has been checked on DBLP, the basis of all articles in automatically checked out of DBLP that gather most articles in computer science. Then, just with this hypothesis, which are very weak, you let time go and you get a theorem saying after waiting long enough, which is not necessarily long, most famous professors are male. That's a fact, independent of your will, of any will. Men and women numbers obey the same power law over time, but the males have a slightly better coefficient, and over time it makes a huge separation between the two. So well, this is not an algorithm, it's an interpretation of nature by an algorithm of nature, of facts. And but many algorithms work like that. Just by doing a few operations, you find the separation between things. So that's very hard to correct, by the way. Huh? Of course, it's an approximation of reality. There are more factors. Good. I gave the reference here. Another reference with an interesting paper called Saxe-Adler algorithm, the theory of evolution and the length of computation by Livnat and Papadimitriou, well-known computer scientists. So the idea is as follows. In nature, we know that sexual tends to be better than asexual for reproduction. So there are species that can switch from sexual to asexual. That is, they may be sexual and have asexual kids and have sexual kids. You have numbers in the papers. And the fact is that sexual reproduction tend to give more offsprings, more children, slightly more children. And that's enough to show that after a little while, there will be many, many more sexual than asexual. That's the power of probability. You cannot go against, you cannot go against the power of probability. So I put the paper here, which is an easy to read paper in CSCM. Good. I use personally, and I teach to other people, hesitant people, the people who hesitate when they are in a restaurant. Will I take this or this, dal or rice? They hesitate. Why? Because I fear I will regret taking not having taken the other one. So here is a very good algorithm that works very well. Flip a coin and allow yourself to replay if you are not satisfied by the first answer. And do that as long as you want. Never seen anybody flipping the coin more than 3 times. Because, for example, if you get 3 heads and you want tail, if you try to replay, you know what you want. Okay, you want the contrary of what you got. And it works very well. You can try. Good, more serious. Now we go to more mathematics. Combinatorial problems. Where practice outperforms theory. Not quite, actually. The Boolean SAT problem. In theory, Yogi Berra, in fact, it's Niels Bohr, but I like Yogi Berra a lot. Yogi Berra was a famous baseball player in America, and he made all sorts of interesting sentences. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. And he also made this sentence I really love: you better cut the pizza in 4 pieces because I'm not hungry enough to eat 6. Very nice to teach mathematics, by the way. Okay, what is the SAT problem? Well, it's one of the simplest problems you can find in mathematics. You have Boolean variables with value 0, 1. You have literals, x and x bar. Bar is a negation. You have operators, and or not implies in classical Boolean algebra. Cool. Now you need two little notion, the conjunctive normal form, which is a conjunction of disjunctions of literals, very simple. And you can write easily by adding variables. If you have you learn at school that if you have an arbitrary formula, to put it in this form will be exponential. That's plain stupid. You can obviously do much better by adding intermediate variables, and that's linear. So getting to this form is no restriction. And so you want to know if this formula can be made true by assigning 1 or 0 to, or true or false to each variable. So here you have 3 solutions of that. Good. Now, little vocabulary. A disjunction of literals is called a clause. A conjunction of literals is called a cube. Okay? Why? I don't know. In 1971, a big revolution in computer science, Cook in Canada defined the notion of NP-hard problem, SAT being the good example, the first example. It's hard to find a solution. It seems hard to find a solution, but checking a solution is trivial. If you look at here, checking is linear, but linear is a little too, well, let's say polynomial. Let's say that polynomial is fast and exponential is slow, which is quite true in practice. Good. Second discovery, a large number of important and different problems are NP-complete, which means such that if you solve one of them, you solve all of them. SAT is a first example. Plain tiling, invented independently at the same about the same time by Levin, is another problem, completely different. And CARP gathered 21 by problem, very different. And now there are hundreds of thousands of really practical problems in lots of, I mean, anything, many things are NP-complete, sometimes not. Primality was discovered to be polynomial by Indian researchers, and so on. So you have a huge catalog in Wikipedia. So the question to know whether there are polynomial ways to solve SAT or any other NP-complete problem is one of the 7 Clay Institute open problem in mathematics with a $1 million recompense. So don't worry, you won't get it. Huh? Theory versus practice now. Conjecture, in the worst case, solving SAT is exponential. Nobody knows how to solve 14 holes and 15 pigeons to show that there are necessarily 2 pigeons in the same hole. Nobody knows how to do that now. It's a good example. We don't know if it is polynomial, but we have no way that is not exponential now to do that. But there have been a huge progress. Mathematicians tended to think that it was useless to attack the problem, but not computer scientists. In 1985, Davis Putnam, Lenstra Loveland invented an algorithm, DPLL, which is just a branching and a backtracking thing on variables, inefficient. In 86, Bryant invented in Carnegie Mellon invented BDDs, so binary decision diagram, a compact normal form, which was used by me, for example, a lot in proving programs. But it is square for many operations, but exponential worst case. And 2 big discoveries in 1996. Closed learning, which means when you do an exploration, a DPLL exploration, a graph, a tree exploration, when you find an inconsistency, then analyze it, and you can add things to the original formula so that if you come back to the same inconsistency, you will find it fast. Very clever. And then in 2001, Chaff by Sharad Malik in Princeton, one more Indian guy, invented a completely magical data structure. This is the course I prefer to give. This data structure is just a plain magic. For which, for example, backtracking is no operation. Absolutely no operation for backtracking. It's very, very clever. and the rest is just like lazy cats, you moving your leg from time to time. And and so when you combine all of that and you make a lot of progress and you add probabilistic algorithms, uh, we can solve equations with millions of variables, but we don't know why. Interesting. No idea of why. What is a good equation? What is a bad equation? As for deep learning, where we don't know why it finds solution and what are these solutions, but here the difference is that the solutions are exact. Good. So this plots 15 years of algorithmic progress, and there is a worldwide competition every year, fairly competitive, but also fairly friendly. And you see the first system, Beckman in 2002. Here you have 300 300 problems identified, a benchmark, and so far about 220. I mean, I don't know exactly, but that's I think it's in 2016. So far, 220 have been solved. In before. Berkman, the first system, solved about 120, but you see the time it solved compared to normal for these problems, compared to normal actual current model solver. And you see the progress, you see the big holes on the way, which are the things I told you. Good. Now SAT is used all over the place. In hardware, it's completely central to validate certain components, and the whole computer chain is used everywhere in hardware. It's very well developed for embedded systems. It has been enriched by things like SMT, satisfaction modulo theory, which is a large extension. There are excellent public domain software here. Oops. Yeah. There are excellent public domain software you can get on the web, many of them now. And more interesting, many optimization algorithms devised by mathematicians or computer scientists have been superseded by a trivial re-encoding of the problem in SAT. And I will show one. Good. So the algorithmic is very pretty in there. A small example, Sudoku is not a very interesting mathematical problem, but it's hard for human beings. So you have a Sudoku. So the rules are very simple, as you know. You have to fill the boxes by cells by 1 to 9, and you have squares where you can only have one of each, and you have lines and columns where you can only have one of each. That's all. So here is the solution. This is a very hard problem according to Le Monde, a newspaper in France where Sudoku was appear. Okay, now well, the problem is now solved per period. Here is the way, stupid. You have to be stupid, not clever. So you take 729 Boolean variables, XLGK. XLGK means at line I and column G, I have a K. That's it. It's true and not true otherwise. Cool. So don't try to write number in binaries. You will lose a lot of time. Unary is much better for that. Cool. Now you write two sets of constraints, which are trivial. There is exactly one value at each position. I won't comment the thing. It takes no time. And constraint two incompatible positions, either in the same square or in the same line, have different values. So you write this thing. Of course, there are lots of variables, so it's a fairly big sentence. It has about 10,000 clauses. Don't try to solve it by hand. And this is true for any Sudoku. And for a given Sudoku, for a given grid, you specify which variables are true to say where the initial numbers are. So you do that. Then you give that formula and the initial condition to a SAT solver. And in less time it put to show the slide, hardly non-measurable. So that's not that's impressive for Sudoku players. I mean, it kills Sudoku forever, I guess. There is no artificial intelligence. It's just a pure algorithm, actually invented by artificial intelligence people, by the way, which is different. The community. Now let's go to math and to Ramsey theory, which is to inevitable properties of integers. You know, for example, a very famous theorem is that if you take a dense enough, which has to be defined, but it's easy, a dense enough subset of the integer, infinite subset of the integer, then you have, it contains an infinite arithmetic progressions. And this kind of subject is immensely difficult and requires a lot of mathematics in all other branches of mathematics. So here is a simple number theory program, simple to state. You call a Pythagorean triple a set of triple of numbers, which are all different, such as a square plus b square equals c square. The question is as follows: can we partition the integers into two different subsets, such that each of them contains no Pythagorean triple? The answer is negative. Okay. There is, of course, a lemma. The answer is negative. It was proved before in number theory. It is impossible for a lemma. It must be impossible for Sime-Salat subset, like 1n, and which is the smallest one. That's the algorithmic question. So the smallest one was discovered using SAT. You will see how it's fun. And it's a 7, 8, 2, 5. That is, it's okay. In 7 to 4, you can split to have Pythagorean, not a Pythagorean triple, but 7, 8, 2, 5, you cannot. So of course, it cannot be done by hand, even by trained mathematicians. So the idea is very simple. Build a Boolean formula that is satisfiable for 2, 4 and not satisfiable for 2, 5. I gave reference of the paper by Martin Euler and others. The formula is very simple. You put one variable xi for each I, each in less than n, and xi, the literal xi encodes I is in a subset positive and p if you want, and if you make a partition into subsets, p and q, and xi bar is in q. And for each triple, you enumerate the triple, which is quite easy. There are not that many for Pythagorean triple, so you can do that trivially. And you write this little formula here, and this little formula here tells that these numbers cannot have the same color. So you get a reasonable size formula, like 20,000 clauses and 6,500 variables. You make some reduction on that, not difficult. And then, you cannot just call that. So you will first do a cube splitting. Cube, it means you fix the values of some variable you choose carefully. And you make two subcases. Case x27 is 1, x27 is 0. And you do a tree like that, a covering tree. And so you simplify the formula according to the value of the variable you chose. And then you get 1 million sub-formula in a tree with 1 million leaves. Actually, it's a DAG, it's not a tree, it doesn't matter. Good. Now then you check SAT on SAT using the conventional engines for the obtain 10 to the 6 formula. If it is satisfiable, like for 7284, you find only one of these 1 million is satisfiable, which was not trivial. And you can build all solutions for it, which is trivial. And then you can recombine, and that's all. That's what you did for 7824. You build all solutions, and then you build the solution to the initial problem, which is basically a little core plus a lot of freedom for variables that don't matter. Cool. For 785, for 7,895, you build, it's false. So this formula are all unsat. Unsat takes longer than SAT usually, because you have to guess, you have to try everything in some sense. So you build 1 million unsat proofs because the new engines like Glucose made in Bordeaux by Laurent Simon and another guy, Glucose 3, Audebert, sorry, I just forgot his name, by Audebert and Simon. Laurent Simon gave a talk in my course. It built a proof in the good old sense, a real proof, a modus ponens proof on unsatisfiability. You do that for each leaf, and then you gather all the unsat proof into a big proof, and you check the proof. So how costly is that? Well, relatively costly. It's about 50,000 CPU hours, which is nothing for a physicist, but for a mathematician, it's a lot. We don't have the same machines. You find an explicit contradiction for 721. You find that 7825 square is equal to two different sum of square. And you find also that by studying the thing before, which was 24, these two must be the same color, but these two must be of the same color, but a different color. So that's a proof. The proof is rather big compared to what we do by hand. It's about 200 terabytes, which is a fair number of disks, but it has been checked completely, seriously. So there was a paper in Nature saying that it was the largest proof ever, but it's not true anymore because Martin Euler again studied another problem of the same kind, but a more difficult one, which is sure. So for each integer, one cannot color all integers with k colors, not two, but k, in such a way that there do not exist three different numbers of the same color, such as a equals b plus c. A equals b plus c is much easier to get than a square equals b square plus c square, of course. So there are many more triples, but there are also many more colors. So what you want is for each k color, number of colors, compute the smallest guy that will, the smallest k that will make it fail. So by hand, it has been calculated up to 4. The theorem was proved by Schur a long time ago. By hand, 44. But 5 was open, and 5 has been calculated to 160. So the principle is exactly the same. So you will do some, you will write the formula by enumerating all the triples. But until 160, there are many more. And you use cube splitting with very smart tools to do that. Glucose, once again, for SAT unsat, and an unsat proof verifier. And now the cost is a little more. For SAT, it's 14 CPU years, and for unsat, it's 36 CPU years. So it's about 50 CPU years on what mathematicians call a big machine, which is for physicists, it's a beginner machine. And the proof is 2.5 petabytes, which is a lot in compressed form. And it has been checked completely. So this is amazing because you can do experiments, very large experiments on numbers and on number theory. But is it mathematics? It's not clear. Well, for example, what you find that you know the exact number of calories, you know exactly, you know for 161, you know the counterexample and so on. But is there a mathematical content? But not quite. I mean, we don't know what's happening inside. We have a new professor at Collège de France, Timothy Growers, who is a researcher in this kind of projects. And it's not clear whether this will teach something to mathematicians, but somehow it's a way to experiment in the field. And everything is interested with numbers, Cool. Now let's go to real math and to computer-assisted verification. This is a very old project started by Nicolas de Bruyne very, very long ago in a system called Automath. Do proofs of mathematics in machine. Some theories are easy, like usual geometry or Presburg arithmetic. I mean, they're easy. Presburg arithmetic is double exponential, but it's easy mathematically. Some things are harder, and so there were many attempts to do mathematics with HOL, high order logic, with Isabelle and with Koch. So for fun, you may know Gérard Huet. Gérard Huet is the author of Koch. He's a great logician, the author of Koch. And now Gérard Huet is doing computerized Sanskrit. And if you look at his site on INRIA, you find a fabulous site about Sanskrit texts, discovering the syntax, the meaning, and so on. But before that, he was developing the theory of Koch. And Isabelle, developed by Larry Paulson in Cambridge. The name Isabelle comes from the daughter, the name of the daughter of Gérard Huet, which is fun. Good. So Leslie Lamport made that sentences I like. Writing is natural ways of letting you know how sloppy your thinking is. Cool. This was done in the 90s in San Francisco College. So Lamport says, mathematics is natural ways of letting you know how sloppy your writing is, which is fairly reasonable. And then you can add formal mathematics is natural ways of letting you know how sloppy your mathematics is. And that's normal because mathematicians write proofs, and sometimes these proofs are so abstract, so intellectual, and so nice that it takes years and years and years and years for them to be corrected. I'll give examples. What is in the main advance in Koch is the exploiting the Curry-Howard correspondence. Curry-Howard is a very simple idea, very beautiful. Curry was a lambda calculus researcher and Howard logician. If you look at mode exponents, if M is true, if M implies N, then N is true. That's the way you say it usually. In math, you write that as written here, M implies N to N. You can do it differently. You can say from a proof of M and a proof of M1, M implies N, compute a proof of N. So this is proof theory now. So in math, you say if P is a proof of M and Q is a proof of N, then Q applied to P is a proof of N. And you view Q as a function from proof to M to proof of M implies N. That doesn't change very much. It's just a little decoration over what we said. It changes everything because we know how to compute with functions. And we have a very good language to compute with functions, which is called the lambda calculus, the calculus of function, Church, 1936. It's amazing. If you look at the lambda calculus, it hasn't changed since 1936. All other languages have changed, including the mathematical language, but not the lambda calculus. Well, it was not right from the very beginning, but then it was made right. It has been enriched, but never changed. Cool. So lambda calculus is the basis of functional programming in computer science. And so we can use the functional lambda calculus to build and compute proofs. And we can do that in languages that are based on the lambda calculus. And Koch is based on a very smart lambda calculus by Jean-Yves Girard and John Reynolds independently, the higher order lambda calculus, where you type lambda terms by lambda terms, making an extremely rich polymorphic typing. And the main theorem of the higher order lambda calculus is that it's strongly normalizing, which means that you cannot build infinite computation in it. All computations terminate, which is what you want to logic, because the definition of proof in logic is the terminating calculation that shows the result, terminating. The lambda calculus, the pure lambda calculus doesn't terminate, but the Girard-Reynolds higher order lambda calculus does. And Huet, Coquin, and Paulin have extended this into the theory of inductive construction, adding a lot of notion of computer science in it and of programming. So Koch is a research in logic, proof theory, plus programming. This is modern mathematics, informatics. The first theorem, interesting, I show is the four-color theorem. Four-color theorem is well known. You have a map of any country, and you want to know how many colors you need to color it, provided that states don't have the same color if they touch by more than 1 point. You see, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona share only 1 point, so they are allowed to be on different colors, but not. They are allowed. For example, Utah and New Mexico could be the same color. That would be allowed, but it cannot be true for the whole map. So it was Guthrie who, in 1852, raised the problem and showed that with 5 colors it was easy, but it was open with 4. There were many proofs by a very well-known mathematician that all killed. All of them were wrong. Some of them were published and lasted 25 years before being killed. And in 1976, Apple and Haken at IBM made a proof in 2 parts, a paper in math and a computation. The paper in math showed that you could prove the thing by exploring only something like 1219 precise maps. I don't remember the exact name, but it doesn't matter. And then they wrote a program in assembly language on an IBM 360 that was checking these maps. And the mathematician referred the paper, said, oh, the paper is perfect, but we cannot believe in the computation. So in the paper, there were sentences like proof omitted, long but standard. You know that? You all do that, I guess. And well, the proofs were wrong, simply wrong. And the mathematical paper was wrong, but the computation were right. And so the solution was built by Georges Gontier. Georges Gontier is a fabulous guy who, you know him, I guess, Madame. He got the first prize in the Olympics of Math. He's a Canadian guy, and I was happy to have him as a PhD, and he did a lot of things of SRL, but I was his student, actually, to be frank. And so he did a complete proof in Coq. Complete, but for this he had to reinvent completely the representation of planar graph topology, as you see in this drawing here, which was completely ignored in the original paper. Good. That was not that interesting, but because the theorem has no interest. But a team in Gontier was at Microsoft, and the people next to me and in Sophia Antipolis at INRIA, they took 10 years to prove the Fate-Thompson odd order theorem, which is a classification of groups of odd order, finite group of odd order, and which is known as one of the first monster theorems with 250 something pages of heavy math, and warning at in the shortened proof, in the compact, the shortened proof. And it starts with a sentence that say, beware, if you are an expert in this domain, reading the proof may take 1 year. Now it's all in Coq. You hit return. It takes about 1 hour to compute. The proof is entirely formal, and it was a big adventure, but it's also very interesting because the first thing they have to do, it uses a lot of different mathematical theory, from groups to isometries to Frobenius to whatever, theory of characters, which is by itself something, Galois theory in arithmetic, polynomials. So they had to devise a computer science oriented and inheritance oriented, in the sense of much more precise than what is called object-oriented programming, but in the same idea. They had to put that in computing. They had to put that in programming language. They had to put that into Coq to be able to program with that. And then, if you look at the theorem in printed form, it's not TeX. They didn't have TeX at the time. And if you look at the theorem in Coq, it's not techified. Here is the source code, the real source code. When techified, it looks more or less like the other one. It's not longer, okay? And if you look at the proof, this is 2 pages of the proof. which, well, sometimes I saw them working in the office next to me. I saw them working for one day on two lines of the proof. Huh? It's not an easy thing. And well, this is a proof in Coq, which is hard to read. So is the other one there for me. And it's not much longer, and it's not techified either. So Coq made it possible to have proofs that were comparable in size to human proofs. What was fantastic is that they didn't find any bug in the proof. That was, I think, the first proof was given in 63, and there were some corrections to the proof until 92. But they found misprints, but no error in the proof. Cool. But you know, this was a known result. So even more interesting, Thomas Hales recently in 2014 proved the Kepler conjecture, which was open. Kepler conjecture is how to pack oranges or apples. Well, you go to any shop and you find the best solution, which is here. The solution like hexagons on the ground and piles of hexagons which are on each other, balls in the holes of the previous hexagons. And Thomas Hales worked for long on that. And in 2003, he had, by using crazy polynomial inequalities in Mathematica, again, he could not do anything without Mathematica, he got a 99% verified proof. Why? Because mathematicians say, yes, but the Mathematica is not verified itself. So he decided to put that in proof assistance, this time not Coq, but HOL Light and Isabelle, so British ones. And he obtained, he devoted 15 years of his life to that, but in fact, it took only 11 years, to do the fully machine check proof of this Kepler conjecture, which is the first real conjecture, which is combinatorial, so it has probably not much implication outside in mathematics, like the four-color theorem, but here it was a very interesting endeavor. And many people had tried to prove Kepler conjecture before. Good. Now let's go back to computing to finish. The danger of informatics is bugs. I explain bugs to kids or to students as follows. If you take a mathematician, I use Kepler as an example, this guy is extremely smart and intuitive. He's slow, like a human being, and he makes mistakes. He's rigor. He tries to be rigorous, but you know, rigor is, for human is not as for a pure logic. On the other end of the big chasm, you have Pentium. So Pentium is immensely stupid, does only very simple things like adding two numbers or putting a number and putting it immensely stupid, immensely fast, and never make mistakes, immensely rigorous. And that's true in practice. So it's exactly the opposite. So programming is going from one side to the other, to the human thinking, to this extraordinary stupid machine. So nothing is easier to do than a bug. So a bug is a little hole, one character. I have good examples, but I won't show them here. And so the bug kills entirely your thing. A micro error can kill everything. So you have two kinds of bugs in practice: safety, that is safety bugs. Well, the system is not doing what it's supposed to be, and security, the system can be attacked from outside. The bugs are the same, like memory errors or whatever. Good. So can we program without bugs? This has been a long-standing debate. And the answer is sometimes. So here we come to the last part, computer-assisted formal verification of programs. I did that a lot on a SRL program, but the most impressive thing done so far is a proven C compiler, ComCert, by Xavier Leroy, who is now professor at Collège de France, Leroy, as you say, who is now a professor at Collège de France on the chair the science of languages, of programming, science of programming. So ComSearch takes a subset of C. C is not well defined, but you can extract a subset which has the correct semantics and which is okay for programming, for example, critical embedded systems. And a compiler goes to assembly of, say, Pentium or PowerPC or ARM, and it makes it has 11 intermediate languages, 10 proven transformation. Each transformation is not trivial. And now there is one more, which is syntax analysis, in fact, is also proved. And they can be very hard. So all of them are proved in Coq, except some, like register allocation, because this has combinatorial algorithm. Instead of proving the algorithm, you will run at runtime a proof, an independent proof that the algorithm is, the result of the algorithm is correct, which is another way to do the verification, but this prover is proved. And this ComSearch tool has no bugs. And what is interesting is that using random narrator techniques, researchers have found hundreds of bugs in all commercial or public compilers, in GCC, in LLVM, in whatever, hundreds of bugs and 0 in ComSearch after 6 million hours CPU, by the way. So it's not only proof that it's checked, and so that's very interesting. And it's so interesting that Princeton opened a lab just on this subject in mathematics. Can we do, using this kind of techniques and the Gontier kind of techniques, can we work on the foundation of mathematics? This was opened by Voevodsky, who was a Turing Award on this, but I don't know where it is now. But also in the US, they have opened a huge computer oriented project on formal specification of very complex systems like operating systems, large communication protocols, networks, all using Coq. And this is now, this is a fantastic boundary between logic, math, and computer science. Good. So, conclusion, mathematics and informatics are completely entangled, not socially. Mathematicians took a lot of time to accept informatics. Eugen Wigner, Nobel Prize in quantum theory, talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. I think now we can talk about even more unreasonable of mathematics and informatics coupled in all sciences, and the possibility of mathematically proving safety and security properties of our informatics objects. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giraffe. Wonderful talk. If anybody has any questions, maybe
one compliment. You will get the slides in source. Okay. They are meant to be stolen. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, does anybody have any?
Let me stop the sharing.
Maybe that will let people come back.
Sharing. Up. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question, so can I go ahead?
Yeah, please, Srivas, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you gave a lot of different ways of relating informatics and various other things, and you also gave biology, simulation as one of the things, but there's also things like biological computing, where computation itself is embedded in biology. Okay, starting from Gates and so on. So where do you, so it's kind of the reverse of what, in some ways, dual of what you were talking about. Like where you, instead of building computers from NAND gates and computation from small things, you actually use the biological processes to build computation in the basic computers and so on. So how do you situate that kind of an
Sorry, the sound was quite bad with a lot of echo. Is it? Can you?
Yeah, so maybe I can repeat the question. So the question is that you talked about the application of computation to solve biological problems, but the dual is the application of biology as a computational device, like biological computing. So how do you situate that in your discussion about?
Okay, I didn't talk about that. This is a fascinating subject. Biology is doing lots of computation, of course, and somehow I have a friend, a biologist at Academy of Sciences in France, who says you have to see the cell as a computer. And the cell is not only, people talk about cells only about DNA and replication and things like that. But he said you have to know that in the cells there are many other computation functions, like, for example, garbage collecting, which is very important, getting rid of old proteins. So detecting old proteins, garbage collecting, energy management, and so on. It looked like a computer with all the bells and whistles of a computer. Many biologists I know completely ignore this stuff. And I think it's a pity, because I think it is serious. In the brain, lots of people are working on computing in the brain, and what is the memory, and what is the relation between computation and memory. I was in a biology lab where people were working on rats, and they discovered extraordinarily subtle algorithm in the hippocampus to know fast about mazes. They equip their rats with electrodes in the brain, and they make them run in a maze, and they record their pulses. And you know about place cells, which was discovered not that long ago, gave a Nobel Prize in biology, in chemistry. The fact that he recruits cells, that's Malloc, and recruits cells that are associated to places. And they discover something very interesting, which is full of mathematics. And of course, they had to do a lot of data analysis for that. Is that as soon as you start moving, your brain starts building a theta wave. Theta wave is a sinusoidal wave at 8 Hertz. And when you move, the hippocampus starts beeping. There is a place, there are place cells that record a place in a physical place, and they start beeping when you get into this physical place. And if you go to another physical place, they will stop beeping, and the other will take again. But there is something very, very, very nice we don't do in computers, which is very good, is that they use the phase of the theta wave. And when you come into a place, you beep early in the phase, and when you leave, you beep late in the phase. So just by playing with the phase, which has no cost in computation, basically, because time is the only free thing in this Earth, you can find your direction, and you can do a lot of calculations. So these are kind of digital analog calculations that biology people discover. But somehow they still lack the computer science training to better understand this. So now they want to couple with computer science. But of course, the brain is full of incredible mechanisms. We know nothing about memory, which is a pain, except that it's pretty good. And yeah, biology is a fabulous area for the future. But for example, I don't quite believe in the Human Brain Project, the initial view, which was to build a huge analog machine and hope that it will do something. Vision is well understood in the brain. Very nice algorithm all over the place. Very nice physical algorithm, extremely economical. We are completely jealous that our brain consumes much less energy than our Pentium.
Yeah.
That's a fabulous area for 100 years, I guess. if I have I'm marked by the Hindu philosophy, so I am already planning some reincarnation, and one will be in that subject.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead,
Uh,
Srivatsan.
yeah, probably maybe not. It's a bit general, maybe not directly related to the talk. I was just wondering, where do you see the future of formal verification? Like you have been, yeah. What do you think in the next 10 to 20 years? Where do you think formal verification would stand?
Okay, that's a good question. In fact, the present of formal verification is better than what people believe already. Formal verification is used in many areas so far, although it's not popularized and it's not easy. That's the problem, huh? But it's used in hardware a lot. Now that you build circuits with 2 billion transistors, and if one part is faulty, the whole industry is in bad shape. That's it. Because, it's not like software. You cannot download hardware. So if you produce a circuit with bugs, which happened, it costs billions of dollars, billions. So people are careful. So they do, for example, at Intel, there are big lab. I work there a lot, big lab on formal verification. And SAT is used in all the steps from CAD to fab. And there are dozens of steps. Now, basically, you have the source code and you want to transform it, not changing the meaning. And so you use very smart SAT engines, structural as well, to show that the transformation doesn't change the meaning. That's true. There are places where it's too difficult, or it's used in embedded systems. For example, for abstract interpretation is used a lot. In avionics, for example, in an Airbus, the flight control, which is written in SCADE, the language we developed in my company, combining Esterel and Lustre from Grenoble. They write the program like that, but the program can be huge. It's hundreds of thousands of lines just to fly the plane and play with wind and very, very smartly absorb wind and reduce energy consumption and so on. But you want to be sure that there is no bug at runtime, that the program cannot crash, and that it computes it's a clocked program, should compute 100 times per second, that it never overflows in time. Knowing that the machines are not predictable with the cache and so on, it is hard. It's done with abstract interpretation industrially now, both properties. In automotive, they do that now too. They start doing, but in automotive, they have no regulation. So formal verification becomes important when you have regulation. That's very clear. In automotive, they want no regulation. You know why? Certified software is much more expensive than automotive is just software. Look at the ads. They don't tell you this car holds the road, this car has good brakes. No, they tell you this car has Bluetooth. Okay. Telecom is hard because it's all dynamic. The web is hard because it's all dynamic. So there is a lot of research for that. But as soon as you get asynchronous, and as you get, you can ask Madhavan, you know that, as soon as you get asynchronous, life becomes much harder because the combinatorics of behavior becomes much harder. It will be a long work, but ComCert has impressed people a lot in the US. Well, I think at some point, people have to realize that the computerized thing we have should work. We are not yet there. They accept bullshit without any problem right now, but it was true for mechanics. It is not true anymore for mechanics. I don't know. I'm hopeful, but it will be slow because the subject is hard.
Thank you. Yeah.
But there is a lot of things to do.
Good. So we are in business for some time at least.
I have one more question. If
yeah, Srivas, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you marked deep learning in red. Okay, so there is a reverse osmosis there, in the sense that you are using some brain-like operations to do programming. I mean, to at least solve tasks that were normally being done using regular algorithms and so on.
Yep.
So what is your take on that? I mean, that is also kind of a reverse of what I brought up as biological computing. So general remark of that, and now there is also, as those kinds of systems like deep neural network, they start getting used to do safety critical tasks, then your regular kind of verification based on whole logic, etc., may not longer hold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you remember my diagram, my initial diagram, there was data, and then there was algorithms, machine, and languages. Okay. In fact, I was talking in this talk, and in my whole career, I was talking about the bottom part. You never heard about data in this talk. Okay. So deep learning, which I know not as much as the rest, but we had a nice idea to invite Yann Lequin to be a professor at Collège de France for 1 year in 2016 before he got the Turing Award. And deep learning is entirely different. The algorithms are trivial. They are very simple. Mm-hmm. The programs are 1 page, 2 pages, maybe sometimes. They are completely parametric, and the same network can apply to. So the point is not there. The point is in a completely different kind of mathematics, because deep learning works fine, just as us somehow, but nobody knows why. In biology, it's true as well. We don't know why we see things, which actually we don't see things. We believe we see things. That's another talk. And deep learning is the same. So there are many mathematicians now, including Stefan Malla, but many others, that try to answer 2 questions. First, what is it computing? Obviously, it's finding shapes in a high-dimensional spaces, by the way, simple shapes, but they are. And obviously, well, it finds that, it optimizes some functions. Well, gradient descent techniques are just simple ways to try optimizing functions, and randomization is a way to avoid local minima. That's fine. But what is the quality of the result? And is the result explainable? So these are the two big areas, not at all the same math. I mean, Stefan Malla, who was the king of wavelets and student of Yves Meyer, who got the Abel Prize recently, and he works on that, and it's completely different from what I say. Yeah, there is no relation whatsoever. What logic has nothing to do with that, basically. So completely open problem, which is not that different from biology, except that we didn't build biology. So biology is even harder, I guess, because we don't know at all how it works somehow. And in Academy of Sciences, I have a thing, a simple idea to distinguish between mathematicians and biologists. When you discuss with a mathematician, it's a joke, of course. If you discuss with a mathematician and you don't talk about mathematics, the mathematician sleeps. If you discuss with a biologist, whatever you say, the answer is much more complicated than that. And they may be right. That's the question. So deep learning, understanding deep learning, understanding its explicability is critical, because newspapers sell miracles, but they are not miracles. And deep learning people don't sell miracles. It's mostly newspaper. And they want to do that. There are two kinds of people: the people who will say, let's go and do the maximum number of things, and people say, let's explain what you are doing, and we may have the mathematics for that. So it's a completely different thing. I know nothing about this mathematics.
So maybe one last question, if anybody has, because it's been fascinating, but I think it's getting long for Gerard also. So
Yeah. Well, for me, it's okay, man. For you, yeah.
So is there any? I don't see any hands up at the moment. So
I would like to ask a question.
yeah, please go ahead.
So you mentioned that these algorithms are stupid but accurate, and human beings are uh, uh, more intuitive and smarter, but they are more prone to make mistakes. So, like, are you thinking of human beings as something different than algorithms?
Sorry, again, the sound was difficult for me here, and I'm a
The
little
question,
deaf.
sorry. So the question was that you mentioned that computers are fast and stupid, and human beings are smart but slow and error prone. So are you claiming that human thinking or human this thing is different from algorithm thinking? Is there a distinction between the
I
way
think
we
that,
think?
no, I think there are lots of classical algorithms in the brain. That's very clear. Vision is known. Vision, there are very, very nice algorithms, digital ones, by the way, and analog ones. So this has been well studied. There are lots of algorithms, but what matters, some of them are completely unknown, like hearing. We know nothing about how we hear stuff, which is a big problem, especially for me, since I've lost quite a lot of hearing. But the problem is integration. What we try to do, there is an interesting book. Not everybody likes it, but I love it. It's called Valiant, called, I don't remember the title of the book, but it's about natural probabilistic way of doing things, not naturally, but good enough. Which is how is it called? Well, you type less Valiant on any book site and you will find it. So the natural way of solving problems by simple probabilities. I don't remember the exact title, but that's very interesting, I think. That is, we have a power of integration of information, which we know nothing, we shouldn't know about, and a power of ignoring information, which is not true for computers. They cannot ignore information somehow. And we have a power for ignoring, for reducing, or probably approximately correct. Thank you. Thank you. Probably approximately correct. Natural algorithm for learning and prospering in a complex world. I like this book, which may be a little bit outdated now with deep learning, but it has a very interesting point of view that what are the very simple algorithms that work very well in an approximate way on complex problems to find simple solutions that are not too stupid. It's a very interesting problem, which is what makes us alive. I mean, none of the problem we encounter every day is solvable somehow, but we keep acting. And it's very interesting. And of course, learning algorithms are fundamental for that. But never forget that a 1-year-old kid is much better than any neural network known. A kid learns a language without speaking, without reading. Try to do that, just by hearing. A kid at the same time learns how to walk, how to play, how to look, how to listen, everything at the same time. We still have a lot of things to understand for that to be possible. And people like Yann LeCun, this is their goal. People say, artificial intelligence is magical and not yet. His goal is to understand how to be as good as a kid. And well, I think this opens completely new problems with completely new mathematics, completely new computing, biology, whatever. Science has never been that interesting, I guess.
Okay, so I think that's a good note to end on. So thank you very much, Gerard, for this really wonderful talk. It's
you.
unfortunate that we had to have it remotely, and we look forward to seeing you. And I'm sure that you are also keenly awaiting your next trip to India, and hope to see you in Chennai. And thank you very much again, and thank you all for attending. Goodbye, good night, and good evening, Gerard.
Thank you all.
Bye bye.
Bye.